The desert winds of Mesopotamia whisper of forgotten empires. Long before Rome raised her marble walls, long before Babylon's ziggurats kissed the sky, there was another power, older, sharper, more ruthless. A name carved not in glory but in blood and iron, Assyria. In the cradle of civilization, where the Tigris and Euphrates breathed life into barren earth, people learned early that survival was never granted, it was taken. The sun burned without mercy, and the land yielded little, but from that harsh soil rose a nation that refused to bow. They forged not only tools but weapons, not only walls but armies. Their gods demanded strength, and the Assyrians answered with conquest. The story begins in Ashur, a city of dust and ambition. Traders from distant lands passed through its gates carrying copper tin and whispers of empires rising and falling beyond the horizon. Within its walls, the hammer's song never ceased, iron against iron, shaping blades that gleamed like lightning under the desert. Sunday, to live in Ashur was to know that peace was only the pause between wars. Trikka Lama, Trikka Babylon, a voice might say there was a kingdom that made the world tremble. Its people believed they were chosen by their god Ashur, destined to rule over all who dared resist. Their faith was not gentle, it was forged in the fires of battle. Each victory was an offering, each city conquered a testament to divine will. But how does a people become the thing others call evil? Is evil born from cruelty or from fear itself? The Assyrians did not think of themselves as villains. They saw order where others saw tyranny, justice where others saw terror. To them, the weak were meant to serve the strong. It was the law of gods and men alike. As centuries passed, their city-states grew restless. Small kings rose and fell like waves on the riverbanks, yet among them one ruler's ambition burned brighter than all others, Tiglath-Pileser III. A man who would not only unify Assyria, but transform it into the world's first true empire. When Tiglath-Pileser ascended the throne in the 8th century before Christ, the land was fractured, its power fading. But he saw what others could not, a future where fear itself could be a weapon. He restructured his armies, no longer a mob of soldiers bound by loyalty alone, but a machine disciplined, relentless, and precise. Iron replaced bronze. Siege towers rolled across the plains like thunder. Communication lines stretched across hundreds of miles, allowing him to command as if the gods themselves carried his words. The sound of drums echoed across the valleys. Cities that once mocked Assyria now trembled at the sight of its banners, black lions embroidered on crimson cloth. Tiglath-Pileser did not conquer for gold or slaves alone. He conquered to prove a truth that no wall, no king, no god could stand against Assyria's will. The chronicles say his armies marched with precision unseen in the ancient world. His scribes recorded the names of conquered lands as if writing scripture. For each city taken, a monument rose not of beauty but of warning. To resist Assyria was to vanish. To surrender was to live in fear, and so the legend grew. Through his rule, the scattered lands of Mesopotamia were drawn together under one symbol, one god, one empire. But the unity came at a price. Behind the victories lay villages burned to ash, families displaced, temples desecrated. The Assyrian Empire was born not in celebration but in silence, the kind that follows a storm too vast to comprehend. Tiglath-Pileser III stood atop his capital's walls, gazing at the horizon painted red by the setting Sunday. Behind him, the cries of his soldiers echoed through the city. Before him, the world stretched wide and waiting. He believed he was chosen to bring order through conquest, to make the world kneel. Yet somewhere in that wind, perhaps even he heard the question history would whisper for millennia. Was it destiny, or was it madness? The voice of the narrator lowers, like the hush before a storm. The story of Assyria is not one of heroes or villains, but of power, how it rises, how it consumes, and how it is remembered. Because every empire begins with a promise and ends with a shadow. The world did not stay silent for long after Tiglath-Pileser's victories. Empires never do. And as the dust of conquest settled, a new voice rose in Assyria, colder, sharper, and infinitely more ruthless. If Rome ruled by law, the narrator's voice echoes deep and deliberate. Then Assyria ruled by fear. That fear had a name, Ashurnasirpal II. He was not born to rule gently. He believed the gods had chosen him not to guide men, but to break them. His words carved into stone tablets declared with chilling pride, "I burned and destroyed. I left no one alive. I built my empire in the ashes of the world." The soundscape shifts, the clang of metal, the beat of war, drums the shriek of horns across the desert plains. Armies of Assyria march in perfect rhythm. Soldiers wrapped in iron faces, hidden behind bronze masks, move like a living wall. Their chariots roar through the dust wheels, slicing through the earth, pulling behind them banners of black and crimson. Cities crumble before them. The walls of rebels splinter under the crash of battering rams. Fire climbs the sky like a second Sunday. And in the chaos, the people of those lands, farmers, children, priests, can only whisper one word: Assyria. The voice of a villager cuts through the narration, trembling yet defiant. They came like a storm and left nothing but ashes. The narrator breathes slow and heavy. Ashurnasirpal II understood what no king before him had mastered: terror could rule longer than swords. He transformed conquest into theater. Each campaign became a lesson to the world. Resistance meant erasure. The king made sure of it. Survivors were scattered cities, rebuilt only to serve as warnings. In every province, towering walls bore carvings of Assyrian soldiers, victorious kings kneeling before them, captives, chained armies fleeing. Even their art was a declaration of dominance. And yet there was order in his brutality. Roads were built, temples rose to honor the god Ashur, trade flourished. Farmers worked fields irrigated by canals the army had dug. The empire grew stronger, richer, deadlier. Fear became the foundation of peace. Inside the royal palace of Kalhu, the capital reborn under his command, courtiers gathered as Ashurnasirpal II strode through a hall lined with alabaster reliefs, his victories immortalized in stone. The torches flickered against the carvings, making the images seem to move to live. Soldiers bowed, priests sang praises, but behind their chants, beneath the music, the silence of the conquered lingered like a curse. Ashurnasirpal paused before one of the walls. His eyes traced the image of himself, taller, stronger, almost divine. He whispered to his advisor, his voice steady and cold, "Let them fear me. Fear builds what mercy cannot." Outside, the night wind carried the cries of prisoners being led to the outskirts. Yet within the palace, the air was filled with the sound of celebration. Musicians played. Dancers moved in golden light. The king lifted his cup of wine, crimson as blood, and declared to the gathering, "Assyria does not conquer for pleasure. We conquer to bring order to chaos. The world must learn obedience." Applause thundered through the hall. But among the slaves who poured the wine, one looked down and whispered beneath his breath, "Order built on fear will crumble in fear." No one heard him, or perhaps no one dared to. As dawn crept across the plains, smoke still rose from the ruins of cities newly taken. The empire expanded, but so did its shadow. Each victory carved deeper into the hearts of men, not respect, not loyalty, but dread. Ashurnasirpal II's reign became legend, his armies unstoppable, his will unchallenged. But fear, like fire, cannot be contained forever. It devours even the hands that feed it. The narrator's tone softens a quiet forewarning. The same flames that forged Assyria's greatness began to burn from within. The sound of drums fades into the faint echo of footsteps retreating through sand. The scene dissolves from the battlefield to the shimmering walls of Nineveh, music, laughter, and celebration replacing screams. Stone carvings of triumph glisten under torchlight. Each figure carved in victory stance, every enemy bowed before the king. But if one listens closely beyond the revelry, beyond the praise, there is another sound hidden deep within the walls, the ghostly echo of those who fell, their stories buried under empire. And so the narrator concludes this chapter. His voice, somber yet magnetic fear, built an empire that touched the heavens, but in its silence the ground beneath began to tremble. The fire that once devoured the world began to change its glow. From the ashes of terror rose something unexpected: beauty. Assyria, once feared for its cruelty, now sought to be remembered for its greatness. Under King Sennacherib, the empire entered its golden age. He was not a mere warrior. He was an architect of dreams and dominion. Where Ashurnasirpal had ruled through fear, Sennacherib would rule through awe. He looked upon the barren plains of Nineveh, a city scarred by centuries of war, and whispered to his advisors, "I will build a city that will outshine the Sunday. When strangers see its walls, they will not tremble in fear, but in wonder." And he did. The sounds of hammers replaced the drums of war. Stone by stone, the city of light was born. Nineveh stretched like a jewel along the Tigris River gardens, lush with date palms, canals that glimmered in the sunlight, temples crowned with golden domes. The great palace, known as the Palace Without Rival, rose above it all. 71 rooms, walls carved with scenes of conquest, triumph, and devotion. But beneath the artistry lay a haunting truth. Every block of marble, every arch, every statue had been carved by the hands of conquered men. The echoes of their labor still lingered in the palace halls. Still, Sennacherib's vision transformed the empire. He built aqueducts, restructured the army, and expanded Assyria's reach beyond imagination. The empire now stretched from the Persian Gulf to Egypt, a realm so vast it seemed the world itself bowed to Assyria. Yet power never sleeps without dreaming of more. When Sennacherib's reign ended, his legacy passed to his grandson Ashurbanipal, the Scholar King. If Sennacherib built the empire's body, Ashurbanipal built its mind. He was unlike any ruler before him. Fluent in multiple languages, a student of philosophy and prophecy, he believed knowledge was the greatest weapon of all. His dream was not of conquest, but of preservation. In the heart of Nineveh, he created something no empire had dared. Imagine a library. Within its walls were over 3,000 clay tablets inscribed with the cuneiform script of ancient wisdom texts on astronomy, medicine, poetry, law, and the epic tales of gods and heroes. The narrator's tone softens reverent. It was humanity's first great library, a sanctuary of thought built by a nation once known only for its sword. Under Ashurbanipal, Assyria reached its cultural zenith. Artists carved stories of kings and gods into alabaster walls. Scholars copied ancient texts by oil lamp. Poets wrote hymns for the gods, and generals marched under banners of victory. The empire glowed with wealth, intellect, and pride, but even in triumph, shadows lingered. In his private chambers surrounded by scrolls and maps, Ashurbanipal often stared into the distance, his voice low and weary. "I can read the wisdom of the ancients, yet I cannot read the fate of my own empire. Will history call me a guardian of knowledge or a tyrant of men?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Because for all his brilliance, Ashurbanipal still ruled with the same iron fist that had defined Assyria for centuries. Rebellions were crushed, dissidents silenced, and cities burned for daring to defy. His armies, though refined, were still the instruments of fear his ancestors had forged. And yet, in the midst of that darkness, there was light. The library became the heart of Nineveh, a place where knowledge was no longer chained to the temples of priests, but open to the will of kings. For the first time, humanity's thoughts were gathered, preserved, and shared. The narration slows, almost wistful. It was the paradox of Assyria, a nation that could carve poetry into stone, yet carve terror into the hearts of men. From the towering ziggurats, the city shone under the desert Sunday. The river flowed with life, merchants traded from across the world, and children played in the shadow of colossal statues depicting winged bulls and kings with eyes of obsidian. It seemed eternal, unstoppable. But somewhere in that perfection, the first cracks began to form. The same walls that held the library also held secrets. The same people who built the empire began to whisper of its weight. And as the narrator's tone deepens, the music swells. Every empire believes it is immortal, until the silence between victories becomes louder than the cheers. Nineveh, the city of light, stood radiant under the sun, unaware that the horizon already carried the color of fire. Even as Nineveh glittered beneath the sun, the shadows around it began to grow. The empire that had once seemed eternal now heard whispers carried by the wind, prophecies of ruin of gods turning their faces away. In the marketplaces, old men muttered warnings. In the temples, priests spoke of omens, the moon-stained red rivers running low locusts, darkening the sky. The voice of the narrator lowers slow and foreboding. Every empire falls not when it is weak, but when it forgets why it rose. Assyria had reached too far. The wealth that once united its people now divided them. The heirs of kings quarreled, generals schemed, and the provinces, weary of endless taxes and wars, began to stir in quiet rebellion. Then came the earthquakes. The ground itself trembled, as if the gods were waking from their sleep. Storms tore across the plains, crops withered, trade slowed, and fear, the very weapon that had built the empire, began to turn inward. In the royal court, silence replaced laughter. The young king, Sennacherib, successor of Ashurbanipal, paced the marble halls of Nineveh, hearing only the echo of his footsteps, advisors argued. Messengers brought tidings of revolt. "The Babylonians are rising," one shouted. "The Medes march from the north." The king clenched his fists. Assyria does not fall. Assyria cannot fall. But outside those towering walls, the world was already shifting. Former allies now became executioners. Armies once loyal now marched under new banners. Across the empire, statues of kings were defaced, temples looted, and cities that had once feared Nineveh now took revenge. The narrator's voice intensifies, layered with the sound of thunder and distant war drums. The coalition of Babylonian and Median forces advanced like a tide of vengeance. When the invaders reached Nineveh in 612 BCE, the city still stood proud, its colossal gates of bronze gleaming, its walls stretching miles around. But arrogance is a fragile armor. The siege began. For months, the armies surrounded the city. They cut its water supply, burned its fields, and waited. Inside, famine took hold. The once great capital became a prison of its own glory. From the palace tower, King Sennacherib looked out across the horizon, smoke rising the river, running black. He whispered to himself, his voice trembling between fury and despair, "We built the world from fear. Now it returns to claim us." The narrator's tone quickens, battle cries echo, the pounding of rams against the gates, arrows slicing through the air. The invaders breach the city. The streets of Nineveh erupt in chaos fire, consuming the wooden rooftops, towers collapsing under the weight of centuries. Women scream, soldiers fall, and temples crack open like bones. The golden statues of kings are melted into rivers of molten metal. The gods themselves seem to tremble. And then, as the narrator lowers his voice to a haunting whisper, those who once sowed terror, now drowned in their own. Nineveh burned for 3 days and nights. The skies glowed red, the heat rising so fierce that the stones themselves began to crumble. The mighty palace, the palace without rival, fell into ruin, its walls collapsing like thunder. From the heart of the temple, the statue of Ashur, the great god of the empire, toppled and shattered. Dust filled the air thick as smoke as the idol's head rolled across the marble floor. Outside, the river swelled, it is said. The Tigris itself rose to wash away the city's remains. Whether by flood or flame, Nineveh vanished. The empire that had ruled the known world was erased in a single storm of wrath and fire. The music beneath the narration fades to a single low heartbeat. The scene slows, charred walls, broken gates, silence heavy over the ruins. A lone voice faint, as if carried by the wind. We were gods once, and now we are dust. The narrator speaks again, his voice deep, mournful, and so it ended. The empire that taught the world fear was consumed by the very darkness it created. The monuments crumbled, the libraries buried the names of kings lost to time, but the echo of Assyria's fall that still remains. The final image, the sun rising over a field of blackened stone, light breaking through the smoke. Amid the ruin, one last fragment stands, the broken statue of Ashur, its eyes empty, its crown cracked. The gods they worshipped did not save them. The fear they mastered could not protect them. The greatest empire of its age had finally met the one enemy it could not defeat itself. The sound of the wind returns, carrying away the last embers of Nineveh. When the fires of Nineveh faded, silence reclaimed the land. The empire that once roared across the world now whispered only through dust and broken stone. The wind moved through the ruins like a spirit carrying the faint echo of drums that would never beat again. And yet, the story of Assyria did not die. Its ashes became the ink from which history would be written. Its legacy, both magnificent and monstrous, would shape the empires that came after Babylon, Persia, Rome. Each of them learned from Assyria's brilliance and its cruelty. The narrator's voice slows deep and reflective. Assyria was called the first empire of evil, but perhaps it was the first mirror reflecting what power truly is when stripped of mercy. Babylon rose from its shadow, painting itself as the savior of civilization. The Persians built on its structure, creating roads and laws where once there had been conquest and chains. Rome carried its torch, disciplined legions, divine kings, empires without end. But beneath all their glory lay the same heartbeat, the same hunger to rule, to bend the world to their image. Assyria's cruelty taught the world that domination was possible. But its fall taught an even greater truth, that fear cannot hold an empire forever. The narration drifts into a quieter tone. The faint crackle of fire returns the sound of parchment burning. Inside the ruins of Nineveh, as flames devoured the great library, a lone scribe remained. His hands trembled as he pressed the stylus into wet clay. Smoke filled the air, choking him, yet he did not stop. Each stroke carved his defiance into eternity. "Let it be written," he whispered, "that we were more than the wars we fought, that we sought to know the heavens." Around him, shelves collapsed, scrolls turned to ash. Still, he wrote, recording not the victories of kings, but the cost of their ambition. That tablet, historians believe, was one of the last to survive, a small fragment of wisdom saved from a sea of destruction. The narrator's voice softens, almost tender. In his final moments, that scribe gave the world a gift far greater than conquest, the reminder that knowledge endures where power dies. Then the music swells, gentle strings, low and mournful. Assyria's fall was not the end of evil, it was its transformation. Evil does not always come with swords and fire. Sometimes it wears the face of progress. It hides behind ambition, behind the quiet conviction that we are different, that our power is justified. The same spirit that drove Assyria's kings still lives in every heart that believes control is worth the cost of compassion. Perhaps evil never truly dies, the narrator muses it, only changes shape, finding new homes in the empires, the nations, the minds of those who believe they can master it. The scene shifts from the ruins of Mesopotamia to the great cities of history, Babylon shining under its hanging gardens. Persepolis vast, and ordered beneath the Persian Sunday Rome built of marble and blood. And finally, the modern world skyscrapers, piercing the clouds, the hum of machines, the silent battles of greed and pride. Each city, each civilization carries a trace of Assyria, the thirst for greatness, the fear of loss, the fragile balance between creation and destruction. The narrator pauses, letting the silence breathe. What Assyria left behind was not just ruins, but a warning. History does not repeat, people do. And if power is left unchecked by conscience, if fear is used once more to command obedience, then the same darkness that swallowed Nineveh will rise again, not in deserts, but in boardrooms, parliaments, and hearts. The tone deepens, almost like a sermon carried by the wind. Assyria taught us that greatness without goodness is hollow, that conquest without compassion is decay, that no empire, no matter how mighty, can outlast the moral laws that bind humanity. The sound of the wind returns, not harsh now, but calm. It passes over the ruins across centuries, carrying one last whisper: we built with fear and fell by fear. Let those who rise after us remember. The narrator's voice grows distant but resolute, as though speaking both to the past and to us. Assyria has vanished, but its story remains, not as a curse, but as a lesson. That every empire built on the trembling of others will one day tremble itself. The final tone is quiet, hopeful, almost redemptive. History is not only a record of what was, it is a reflection of what we are. And if we listen closely, the ruins still speak warning, teaching, reminding that the mightiest power on earth is not fear, but the courage to rise above it. A single heartbeat, then silence.